Having finished our study in the book of Acts, we now move on in our midweek messages to the Epistle to the Galatians. But before we leave Acts, we must take a moment to revisit the 14th chapter in order to set the table for the things that Paul will address with the believers in Galatia. And now, here's Pastor Todd.
Thank you for joining us for the midweek message. Today we're moving into a new book. We're moving to the book of Galatians. As we finished up the book of Acts, we saw that Paul is in Rome. Paul is allowed to have visitors. He's going to be there for 2 years. When the book of Acts finishes, it's not the final chapter of Paul's story. It's just the new church to that point. So when you see the book of Acts, you're talking about the beginnings of Christianity and how it spread in so many areas of what we would call the Near East and Europe. So now we're going to look over into some of the books that Paul's written. He's credited with writing 13 of the New Testament epistles. He was an incredible theologian for the New Testament church, and he was a strong advocate for this idea of grace in everything. He fought different people. When I say fought, he argued against different groups that would stand against him. In the book of Galatians, the group that's standing against him is Judaizers. They were people who believed that you needed to be Jewish before you could truly be Christian. You had to be Jewish before you could know the Messiah. And part of that would be that you would need to be circumcised as a man, and that all these rules, and it was very legalistic, and it was going back to legalism. And Paul is going to write back against that, push back against that. They are going to make the argument that Paul really wasn't an apostle, that Paul was just chosen to be by himself, and all these different accusations against Paul, trying to tear him down or tear his teachings down. The book of Galatians is written, we believe, as the first book. Now, for a long time, Thessalonians was thought to be the first book that Paul wrote, but now we believe that Galatians may have been that first book. If it is the first book, it means that it was written during his first missionary journey. That's the assumption that's made. Now, the Galatians were not a trusted people. Caesar actually talked about he didn't trust them. In the book called the Gallic Wars, Caesar is going to say they are not a trustworthy people. They're too emotional. They can change from one side to the other very quickly. In this first segment, I'm not actually going to get in the book of Galatians. I'm actually going to go back to Acts chapter 14 because I want you to see the introduction to Paul and this group of individuals. You can kind of see how the interaction takes place. You see the emotionalism that others had noticed in this group of people, and you can see how it plays out in Paul's life. So let's look at this together. Acts chapter 14 in verse 8. And in Lystra, a man without strength in his feet was sitting, a cripple from his mother's womb, who had never walked. This man heard Paul speaking. Paul, observing him intently and seeing that he had faith to be healed, said with a loud voice, "Stand up, straight on your feet." And he leapt up and walked. And now when the people saw that Paul had done, they raised their voices, saying in the Lycaonian language, "The gods have come down to us in the likeness of men." And Barnabas they called Zeus, and Paul Hermes, because he was the chief speaker. Then the priests of Zeus, whose temple was in front of their city, brought oxen and garlands to the gates, intending to sacrifice with the multitudes. But when the apostles Barnabas and Paul heard this, they tore their clothes and ran in among the multitude, crying out and saying, "Men, why are you doing these things? We also are men of the same nature as you, and preach to you that you should turn from these useless things to the living God, who made the heaven and the earth, the sea, and all the things that are in them, who in bygone generations allowed all nations to walk in their ways. Nevertheless, He did not leave Himself without a witness, in that He did good, gave us rain from heaven and fruitful seasons, filling our heart with food and gladness." And with these sayings, they could scarcely restrain the multitude from sacrificing to them. Then Jews from Antioch and Iconium came there, and having persuaded the multitudes, they stoned Paul. and dragged him out of the city, supposing him to be dead. However, when the disciples gathered around him, he rose up and went into the city, and the next day he departed with Barnabas to Derbe. So here's Paul's introduction to these people of Galatia. He heals someone, and instantly they're willing to sacrifice to him because they are calling him and Barnabas gods sent from the heavens. It was all Paul and Barnabas could do to keep them from sacrificing to them and honoring them and glorifying them as gods. And I don't know how long the period of time is, whether it was that afternoon or whether it be a few days later. But at some period of time, Jews came from other places where they had already been, and they roused up the crowd and explained to them how horrible Paul and Barnabas really were. And literally the same crowd that was about to take them and worship to them and sacrifice to them, that same crowd stoned Paul. They stoned him till they thought he was dead. In fact, the Christians gathered around him, I think, kind of having a little bit of a service there. But Paul came to, stood up, and they eventually led him away. This is the group of people that Paul's writing to. This is a group of people that started one of the earliest churches. But man, they are swayed to and fro by whoever shows up next. So when you see Paul's writing to the Galatians, understand he's writing to a very emotional people. I want to tell you, Christianity, for all of its wonderful trappings, got off to a very rough start. Being a missionary in that first century was a hair-raising opportunity. But Paul loved it, and he loved the people. And so in the book of Galatians, he's trying to help them to become better Christians. We'll pick that up next week. Thank you for watching. You have a great day.